Have you ever wondered why so many people feel lost, anxious, or broken long after their school years are over? Why the very place that was meant to shape our minds and prepare us for life often leaves us disoriented, disconnected, and unsure of who we truly are? Today we are going to explore one of the darkest truths hidden in plain sight: how the structure of modern schooling destroys the human spirit from childhood. We will examine this through the eyes of two of the most uncompromising philosophers in history, Arthur Schopenhauer and Friedrich Nietzsche. Schopenhauer, the philosopher of pessimism, who revealed the relentless suffering woven into human existence, and Nietzsche, the radical thinker who urged us to break free from conformity and become who we truly are. Together, they expose the illusion of education as liberation and reveal it instead as a system of control, conditioning, and destruction of individuality. In this video, we will journey step by step through the ways in which schooling shapes and imprisons the human mind, and not for freedom, but for obedience. And to begin, let us first understand the roots of this system and how it plants the seeds of despair long before we even recognize them. Part 1. The Birth of Obedience. Schopenhauer once wrote that life is suffering, and suffering is the inescapable truth of existence. But he also believed that much of our misery is not simply natural. It is manufactured and multiplied by the systems we build. School is one of those systems. From the very first day a child enters the classroom, something essential is taken away: freedom. The child, full of curiosity, imagination, and an unshaped will, is suddenly confined to rigid schedules, bells, and standardized lessons. What Schopenhauer saw as the living force of the will, the essence of human existence, is systematically silenced. Instead of allowing this natural will to unfold, schools reshape it into obedience. The child learns quickly that questioning authority is punished, that grades matter more than truth, that memorization is valued above understanding. This is not education. It is training for submission. Nietzsche would later call this process the killing of the spirit. For him, true education should cultivate strength, independence, and the ability to affirm life even in the face of suffering. But instead, modern schooling produces a herd of passive minds. The classroom becomes a microcosm of society, where children are conditioned to accept rules without reflection. They are taught to follow paths laid out for them rather than create their own. The philosopher who cried out, "Become who you are," would have looked at the school system as a machine designed to ensure you never do. What begins as a promise of knowledge ends as the destruction of individuality. This is the first betrayal of childhood, the birth of obedience. It is here that the human being first learns to silence his or her inner voice, to suppress creativity, and to become a cog in a larger machine. Part 2. The Death of Curiosity. If obedience is the first wound inflicted by schooling, the second is the death of curiosity. Schopenhauer observed that our natural state as human beings is to question, to seek to reach beyond what is given. He described philosophy itself as nothing more than wonder, the astonishment at the fact that we exist. But what happens to this wonder when a child's questions are replaced with endless drills, worksheets, and exams? The answer is simple: curiosity dies. Schools often claim they nurture critical thinking, but the reality is that they suffocate it. Instead of being encouraged to explore the mysteries of life, children are handed prepackaged answers. Instead of being rewarded for asking why, they are rewarded for repeating what. This is the tragedy Nietzsche saw: the reduction of learning to mere utility. For Nietzsche, knowledge was never meant to be mechanical. It was meant to be transformative, dangerous, even unsettling. True knowledge shatters illusions, awakens us, and forces us to confront uncomfortable truths. But schools are not designed for this. They are designed for predictability, for measurable outcomes, for producing uniformity. When Nietzsche spoke of the herd, he was pointing directly at this kind of conformity. The system does not want thinkers. It wants workers. It does not want creators. It wants imitators. The death of curiosity is not an accident, it is a feature. A curious child is unpredictable, resistant, even rebellious. But a child trained to accept answers without question is easy to control, easy to direct into the machinery of society. Schopenhauer would have seen this as yet another way the world multiplies suffering, by denying us the joy of wonder, the only thing that makes existence bearable. And so the second betrayal of schooling is revealed. A child who might have been a philosopher, an artist, a visionary, or simply a free spirit, is instead turned into a silent recipient of facts. Their natural thirst for knowledge is replaced with a fear of failure, their creativity with anxiety over grades. This is the slow and silent death of curiosity, and it is the reason why so many adults later struggle to rediscover meaning in their lives. Part 3. The prison of comparison. If obedience breaks the will and schooling kills curiosity, then the third wound inflicted upon the human spirit is the prison of comparison. From the earliest days in the classroom, the child is ranked, measured, and judged not by who they are, but by how they perform against others. This system of constant evaluation does not foster growth. It fosters anxiety, jealousy, and self-doubt. Arthur Schopenhauer once said that much of human misery comes from comparison, from looking outward and defining ourselves by the achievements or possessions of others. In school, this principle becomes institutionalized. Grades, test scores, gold stars, and rankings create a battlefield where children are not valued for their uniqueness, but only for how well they match the system's narrow definition of success. The individual becomes invisible, reduced to numbers and letters on a report card. Nietzsche warned against this exact phenomenon when he spoke of the herd instinct. He argued that greatness is never born from conformity, but from breaking free of it. Yet schools condition children to measure themselves not by their inner potential, but by their proximity to the average. Those who rise above are labeled arrogant. Those who fall below are labeled failures. And thus the prison of comparison locks every child inside, ensuring no one dares to step beyond the walls. The true tragedy here is not only that comparison breeds suffering, but that it blinds us to our individuality. A child who might excel in creativity or imagination learns to feel worthless because their strengths are not on the test. Another who is deeply reflective may be crushed because their intelligence does not fit into multiple choice answers. This prison turns natural diversity into a hierarchy of worth, and in doing so, it destroys confidence, independence, and self-belief. Part 4. The erasure of individuality. The fourth way schooling destroys the mind is through the erasure of individuality. Schopenhauer argued that the will within each of us is unique, a singular expression of life's striving. Yet the school system does not care for this uniqueness. It seeks to erase it. The classroom is built on standardization, identical lessons, identical tests, identical paths. Everyone must march in the same direction at the same pace for the same goals. Nietzsche would have called this the greatest sin against life itself. For Nietzsche, the highest task of existence is to become who you are. But in schools, who you are is irrelevant. What matters is fitting into categories, obeying the same rules, and suppressing whatever makes you different. The strange child, the rebellious child, the dreamer, and all are punished or pathologized. Instead of being nurtured, their uniqueness is seen as a problem to be corrected. This erasure has long-lasting consequences. Children learn not to express their true selves, but to wear masks that please authority. They learn to abandon their passions if those passions do not bring grades or approval. They learn to shape themselves not from the inside out, but from the outside in, molded by expectation. Nietzsche's call to authenticity, to carve one's path with courage, is silenced by a system that rewards conformity and punishes deviation. The erasure of individuality is perhaps the cruelest wound because it is invisible. Many people spend their entire lives never realizing that who they are was buried in childhood. They live as strangers to themselves, haunted by a vague sense of loss, not knowing it was the classroom that stole their originality. For Schopenhauer, this is another face of suffering, the quiet despair of living someone else's life. Part 5. The Cult of Utility. If individuality is erased, what is it erased for? The answer lies in the fifth betrayal of schooling, the cult of utility. Schopenhauer believed that much of life's suffering comes from the endless striving of the will, the constant pursuit of goals that never truly satisfy. Schools embody this restless striving by teaching children that knowledge is only valuable if it is useful. Learning is not for joy, not for meaning, not for the beauty of truth itself. It is for exams, careers, and productivity. Nietzsche despised this reduction of education to mere training. For him, true learning was dangerous, transformative, something that could overturn your entire life. But modern schooling transforms knowledge into a commodity. Mathematics is not the language of the universe. It is preparation for a job. Literature is not the echo of the human soul. It is a passage to be analyzed for a test. History is not the story of humanity. It is a list of dates to be memorized. This cult of utility teaches children to see learning as a burden rather than a liberation. They come to believe that value lies only in what can be measured, sold, or applied. Philosophy, art, music, the very subjects that nourish the soul, are dismissed as impractical. Nietzsche's vision of education as a path to self-overcoming collapses under the weight of utility. The tragedy here is not only the destruction of joy in learning, but the distortion of values. Children grow into adults who ask not "is this true?" or "is this beautiful?" but only "is this useful?" Schopenhauer would call this a deepening of life's suffering, for it replaces the possibility of meaning with the emptiness of utility. We are trained to chase goals that never satisfy, to measure life by productivity rather than depth. The cult of utility thus ensures that even as we leave school, the chains remain, why invisible but unbreakable. Part 6. The Fear of Failure. The sixth wound that schooling inflicts is perhaps the most insidious of all: the fear of failure. From the earliest years, children are taught that mistakes are not opportunities for growth, but evidence of inadequacy. A red mark on a page, a low grade, a disapproving glance from a teacher, these become symbols of shame. The child learns to associate error with humiliation rather than discovery. Schopenhauer saw suffering as inseparable from life, but he also understood that suffering often comes from illusions we impose on ourselves. The school system manufactures one of the greatest illusions: that perfection must be achieved, that worth is measured by flawless performance. But in reality, mistakes are the very essence of growth. They are the stepping stones to knowledge, the cracks where light enters. Nietzsche, too, despised the cult of perfection. For him, greatness was born not from avoiding failure, but from embracing it, even willing it. His doctrine of amor fati, the love of fate, meant to accept not only triumph but also mistakes, losses, and struggles as essential parts of becoming who we are. But in schools, this truth is hidden. Instead of loving fate, children are taught to fear it. Instead of embracing challenges, they avoid them, terrified of falling short. This conditioning creates adults who are afraid to risk, to create, to fail boldly. They choose safe paths not out of passion but out of fear. The fear of failure becomes a lifelong prison, keeping people from ever testing their limits, from ever discovering their potential. In this way, the classroom continues to haunt the adult mind long after graduation. Part 7. The silence of the soul. If fear of failure poisons the spirit, then the seventh and final wound is the silence of the soul. Schopenhauer believed that art, music, and philosophy were some of the only escapes from the relentless suffering of the will. These pursuits allowed us to transcend the narrow confines of existence and glimpse something higher. But what does the school system do with these sanctuaries? It silences them. Creativity is sidelined. Music and art are reduced to optional extras, often stripped away in favor of serious subjects. Philosophy, the love of wisdom itself, is either absent or sterilized into trivia. The very practices that allow the soul to breathe, to rise above the grind of life, are dismissed as distractions. Nietzsche would have seen this as a crime against life itself. For him, music was not an ornament but the heartbeat of existence. Art was not decoration but a weapon against nihilism. To silence these is to silence the very core of what makes us human. And so, children leave school having learned mathematics and grammar, but having lost their inner voice. They can recite facts, but they cannot sing their own song. They have been trained to function but not to live. The silence of the soul is the final betrayal in the quiet, extinguishing of our deepest capacities for meaning, joy, and transcendence. Ending. Awakening beyond the classroom. Now that we have seen these 7 betrayals, obedience, the death of curiosity, the prison of comparison, the erasure of individuality, the cult of utility, the fear of failure, and the silence of the soul, the question remains, what can we do? Schopenhauer would remind us that life will always contain suffering, but that recognizing its sources frees us from illusion. Nietzsche would challenge us to go further, to rebel against the herd, to reclaim our curiosity, our individuality, our courage, and our creativity. The school may have been the place where our spirits were wounded, but it does not have to be the place where our story ends. Each of us can choose to rediscover what was buried. The child who loved to ask questions, the dreamer who painted worlds in their imagination, the rebel who refused to be silenced. Education does not end in the classroom. In truth, it begins once we walk out of it. So let us take what Schopenhauer revealed about suffering and what Nietzsche demanded about becoming, and use them as weapons against the chains of conformity. Let us reclaim our souls from the silence, our minds from obedience, and our lives from the cult of utility. For only then can we escape the shadow of schooling and finally begin the greatest task of all, to become who we truly are.